When true heroes are passionate about what they do, it is impossible to ignore the results. The passion of a saintly school director in the interior of Burundi caught my attention most. Her sacrifice manifested effective and lasting peace education for children. Her name is Modeste Karegwa Momamo. During the intensity of the conflict in the early 1990s, she started a school for pre-primary age children that incorporated actions and habits promoting equality and peace. Primary education is available to some Burundians, but not all. So when the children in her class were old enough, she started a primary school for her kids. Modeste also recruited other children from various tribal backgrounds, religions, and income levels to learn and practice equality and peace daily. Igiti kigarogwa kikirigito is a Burundian proverb in the local language of Kirundi. Straighten a tree when it is young. This was the grand strategy, to create an educated generation of Burundian citizens that would live peacefully and not repeat the genocides of the past. The students of Magarama Peace Primary School in Gitega, Burundi scored in the country's highest 10%, but compared to the number of primary schools, there were only enough secondary schools to handle about 2% of the primary school's graduates nationwide. Going to secondary school was a luxury, and a lottery system managed acceptance. So even though Modeste Peace School offered some of the smartest children in the country, very few were allowed to continue. The government awarded some land to Modeste outside the city to build a secondary school and continue to educate her brilliant students. Modeste and others in her group campaigned vigorously to raise the nearly $180,000 required to build an entire school campus. An organization in Holland sent enough to erect an administrative building and do some groundwork for the preparation of several other buildings, but that was it. No additional money had come in for the worthwhile project. She introduced me to two of the watchmen who were hired to watch the property when she showed me the land and the progress. They were there to make sure that the bricks and tiles weren't stolen by other locals needing materials for their own home or to sell for food. After the introductions and the translations from the local language Kirundi, there was another conversation that sounded apologetic. I asked her what was going on, and she explained that there was no money left to pay the watchmen who were without pay for already 2 months. How much do they receive? I asked, feeling curious about what grown men with families get paid in the hills of Burundi. $8, Modeste replied. Per day or what? I continued. No, per month. They each get paid $8 per month, she said as flatly as she could, regretting that they couldn't be paid more for their tireless work. Listen, please let me help. I don't have a lot, but I know I can cover this. Modeste accepted. So, for $32 US, I paid 2 grown men 2 months of wages. I then understood why Burundi was the second poorest country in the world at that time in 2001. For those of you curious, Sierra Leone was rated the poorest country in the world by Amnesty International in the same report. Both watchmen were extremely grateful, but one of them said something in Kirundi and started giving some of the money back to Modeste as a payment for something owed. What is that for? I asked. He needed malaria medicine 2 weeks ago for his 5-year-old child, and he didn't have the money to pay for it. I gave the medicine to him, and he's paying it back. Okay, I said, looking a little confused. How is the child now? She didn't make it. She died the next day. Modeste replied like this is just part of daily life in Burundi, Africa. My mom and dad told me that I had malaria when I was a toddler, but I don't remember it, and now feel incredibly fortunate that I lived through it. I convinced Modeste to return the money to the watchman, and I would settle his account later on. They were both deeply grateful. This day was indeed very impactful. I never before knew the effect of what seemed like a small portion of my resources making a big difference in another person's life, or in this case, in the lives of 2 families. Modeste's peace education curriculum became nationally recognized, and she was invited to speak and share her passion internationally. At the time of writing this, Modeste also makes a difference as part of Burundi's parliament. Modeste also heads up an international committee dedicated to regional, multinational peace education. Honestly, it was the accidental place of my birth that gave me the most inroads into this war-torn country. My good friend, Burundian brother, and hero Aimé taught me many Kirundi phrases, proverbs, and basics to present myself conversationally polite and capable for about 30 seconds. He was at Kibimba during the 1993 massacre as a 14-year-old student. Of course, he speaks Kirundi, but is also fluent in French, Swahili, and English. He was the perfect guide and teacher in all of my visits to Burundi. I took some videos of him pronouncing words and phrases in Kirundi. You can see them and learn some Kirundi for yourself on ericriley.com. Navukiye mu Kibimba, translated from Kirundi, I am from or born at Kibimba, was one of the first phrases that I asked Aime to teach me. Of all of the basic Kirundi that I learned, this statement, Navukiye mu Kibimba, proved to be the most valuable. Navukiye mu Kibimba became like a passphrase for instant cultural identification. It even landed me a meeting with the general of the rebel forces, General Evariste Ndayishimiye. His wife, Angelique, was also born at Kibimba. A mutual, well-connected friend informed me of the invitation and set up a time to enter the general's well-fortified property and enjoy coffee, snacks, conversation, and relatedness by merit of my birthplace. I had my camera and took a picture of us all together. I took another picture from my hip of one of his fully armed soldiers most trusted for personal and family attendance. He seemed to be playing babysitter, holding the general's baby while we visited. What an image of protection. 18 years after the meeting, General Evariste is now President Evariste, President of Burundi. Kibimba had a primary school and a secondary school for basic education and a Bible school to train pastors and Christian workers. Even though I was born in one of its houses, it had a hospital too. Kibimba, located at the center of Burundi, was a beacon of health and education. There have been no missionaries there for several decades because of the conflict. However, it still exists as Kibimba and offers top education and medical care with only a nursing school because the doctors fled under threat of death during the genocide. The doctorless hospital and nursing school at Kibimba was in very short supply of basics like gauze, syringes, needles, antibiotics, scalpels, and large bandages. There was a nonprofit organization in Houston, Texas, that specialized in international charitable medical resources. They prepared a couple of large trunk-sized plastic containers for me to take on one of my trips. They were sealed with plastic zip ties and had the word Kibimba on the lids, written with a magic marker. When I arrived at airport customs, I knew that I would have to open the trunks and let them search everything. It was worse knowing that the valuable items would be thrown away if found, like antibiotics were illegal to pass. The customs officer was in an army uniform. He looked at the plastic containers and back at me. I said, "Navukiye mu Kibimba." He waved me past without a word. I delivered these supplies at the request of another of my heroes named Aloise Ningabira. Aloise was a nurse at Kibimba Hospital when it had doctors to treat patients. Even with no doctors, many people relied on the hospital's limited staff to treat their injuries and sicknesses. Aloise rose to the occasion. He was inspired to teach others how to be nurses and started the Kibimba Nursing School. He also created a team of nursing students to travel to the nearby villages and educate them about the AIDS virus through entertaining dramatic skits and songs. I made 5 trips to Central Africa in 4 years, including Uganda, Tanzania, and Rwanda, but I always ended my trips in Burundi. The last of those trips was in response to a wedding invitation from a friend that was getting married in Kampala, Uganda, 16 days after the request. His name is Andrew. He lived in the U.S. for more than 25 years and was planning a traditional Ugandan nuptial with his bride. We were both living in a small Texas town and frequently joked about being African brothers. One morning, the week after Thanksgiving, Andrew walked into my t-shirt and sign shop. Making no small talk, he declared, "Eric, I'm getting married on December 15th, and you're invited." "Great. Where? I'll be there," I answered, looking straight into his eyes. He smiled, almost laughing, and said, "Kampala, Uganda." I felt like it was a dare, and I didn't want to back down. "Okay, Andrew, you bet. I'll be there." Fake it until you make it, right? I knew I only had about $400 in my bank account, and business was in its slow holiday season, but I felt empowered by my declaration against the $2,300 that it usually cost to make the trip. There it was. It came out of my mouth, and another person heard it, and it became real. Andrew walked out, clearly pleased about the results, knowing his African brother would be attending his important day with him halfway around the world. I was a member of the local Chamber of Commerce. I knew another member that owned a travel agency a block away. Within the hour, I called her out of curiosity and told her the story and my current financial status. After a few minutes of looking, she said she could get a round-trip ticket for me to Entebbe International Airport in Kampala for a rock-bottom price of $1,900. I thanked her for her time and went on with my day. At 3 p.m. the same day, 2 men walked in asking for me. My store manager summoned me from the production area. I invited the 2 men to go to the back area with me for a little privacy. They were regular customers of mine, but the kind where I would always go to their business to meet them and complete their orders. Their presence in my shop was rare. They owned a couple 8-liner pseudo-gambling salons that barely passed under the strict Texas gambling laws. My company designed and applied large and colorful graphics to their windows to attract customers. The older one said, "We hear you've been doing some good things in Africa and we want to help a little bit." My ears perked up, and I replied with a smile, "Well, it's funny that you should come in today. I just told a friend of mine that I would be at his African wedding. Afterward, I want to take a bus to Burundi for a few days and acknowledge a couple of friends of mine who have been doing such amazing things. So thank you for being here." The younger gentleman pulled a folded check out of his pocket and handed it to me. "Here you go. I hope it helps." I thanked them from the bottom of my heart. We talked a little bit about their locations and more graphics they needed on a vehicle, and then they left. Out of professional courtesy, I didn't unfold the check until they were gone. $1,500. Add that to my bank account balance, and it looked like I would be making good on my promise to be at Andrew's wedding. What a day. I've learned that I do a lot of things in my life in response to a dare or a hidden possibility of bragging rights. Whatever it was, it worked. I made my trip to Uganda and stayed there a week to enjoy the wedding festivities. Another meeting that happened during that week in Kampala was spending a day with Patrick's brother Henry, who was doing incredible work rehabilitating child soldiers. What a truly amazing individual and equally outstanding family. Looking back, my stay in Uganda might have been a little longer. I remember spending Christmas Eve of that year in Kigali, Rwanda, which was my overnight stay between bus trips over 2 countries from Uganda to Burundi. Burundi was the same as the previous 4 trips, only the mode of transportation made it different. I think I was the first white guy, or muzungu, a Swahili word similar to the word gringo, that any of these bus drivers had ever seen on their buses. The next day, a missionary friend went up country and gave me a ride to Gitega, Burundi, the site of Magarama Peace School. I arranged a meeting with my 2 heroes, Modeste, the director and founder of the Peace School, and Aloise, the director of the nursing school at Kibimba. I listened to both of them for about an hour. I took the opportunity to fully acknowledge them for their miraculous effectiveness amid everything against them that wanted to tear them and their projects apart. I just told the truth and was generous with it for about 10 minutes. That was it. That's what I went there to do, and it was done. The next morning, I caught a ride to the capital city, Bujumbura. There, I boarded the first of 2 buses that would take me back to Entebbe International Airport in Kampala, Uganda, and onward to my hometown in Texas. At the time, I attended some seminars with Landmark Worldwide, a personal training and development company. There were several people in that community that knew what I was doing in Africa. A couple of months after my final return, someone gave me an August of 2003 issue of Texas Monthly. There was an article about the massacre at Kibimba in Texas Monthly. The article was about a student running coach, Gilbert Tuabonye, who escaped after being severely burned but was protected from death under a pile of smoldering corpses. Here's a link to that article, or added in the description. After reading the article, I found Gilbert's home number and called him. "Mwiriwe," I said in Kirundi. He asked me who I was and why I knew Kirundi. "My name is Eric Riley. I read the article about you in the Texas Monthly. Navukie Mukibimba." That's all I needed to say, and he demanded to meet with me. Gilbert is still a running coach with a team of runners in Austin, Texas called Gilbert's Gazelles. He also was a choice trainer for VIPs such as Governor Perry and both daughters of President George W. Bush. I drove from Houston and met Gilbert and his family at his house. Later that year, I joined them for Thanksgiving dinner as well. We had much to talk and dream about for Burundi and memories of Kibimba. 2 years later, my sister Teresa told me about a Burundian that she met at a refugee center in Dayton, Ohio, near where she lived. His name is Pio. Teresa told Pio about me and my trips back to Burundi. He requested to meet me. I had no plans to fly to Ohio, but he said that he was traveling to San Antonio, Texas, to see some friends and asked me if I would join him there. Pio and his friends are a small collective of Burundians and Rwandans that has a deep passion for lasting peace in both countries. Included in this collective is Paul Rusesabagina. The movie Hotel Rwanda was about a hotel manager that risked his own life to protect the life of more than 1,200 Tutsis in the Rwanda genocide of 1994. Paul eventually moved to the United States many years after and ended up in San Antonio, Texas. The meeting was at his house. My buddy Matt and I met with Paul a couple times after that for some possible business in that region of Africa. The experience of meeting and briefly participating in Paul Rusesabagina's life was incredible. Many key players were left out of the story who were crucial for the events to happen. Maybe I can share with you about them in a conversation sometime. This story reflects the kind of fortune that the guy in this body has been blessed to experience. It was a series of events, people, and curious connections that have left an unforgettable impact on my life.